My name is Joanna Whitfield. I'm 69 years old, a retired community nurse, and a widow of 14 years. I've spent most of my life tending to others, strangers, patients, neighbors. But the ones I gave the most to were the ones I raised. My son, Nathan, and, in the years that followed, his daughter, Emma. Frank, my husband, passed quickly. He left one morning for a walk and never came back. A heart attack took him in under 6 minutes. Since then, life has moved quietly, quieter than I was prepared for. I gave up our home eventually. The old wood cabin on Elmsworth Lane, the one with the flower boxes and the rocking chair he made me on our 40th anniversary. Nathan told me, "It's not safe for you to be alone anymore, Mom." He said he and Sabrina, my daughter-in-law, wanted me closer. Closer, it turns out, can be a complicated thing. That day, the day it all began to shift, started like any other. It was just after 2 in the afternoon. I was in the kitchen, steeping Earl Grey, counting the curls of steam in my teacup like always. I had folded the laundry, picked up Emma from school. She was coloring quietly at the dining table. The sun was soft through the window, like it hadn't heard what was coming. Nathan popped his head in. He wore that rushed smile he always did when he was up to something. "Hey, Mom, we've got to run a few errands. Won't be long." "Think you could watch Emma for a bit?" I nodded. Of course I could. I always could. That's what I was there for. To help. He kissed Emma's head. Sabrina waved vaguely from the door, already halfway out, and then it was just the two of us again. Me and Emma. She kept coloring for a while. I could hear her pencil scratching the paper, light and determined. Then she looked up. Her eyes were big and unsure, her voice the softest whisper I've ever heard. "Grandma," she said, "I heard Mommy and Daddy talking. They said they're planning something. Behind your back." I turned to her, kneeling down beside the chair. "What kind of something, baby?" She frowned. That frown children make when they know something's wrong but don't know how to say it. They said something about your house and your money, that you might not live with us soon, that you might go to a home. I smiled. Not because I wasn't hurt, but because I needed her to feel safe. I needed to remember what calm felt like, just long enough to hold it steady in front of her. I brushed her hair back gently, behind her ears. "Well then," I said softly, "why don't we start a little project of our own?" She blinked. "What kind of project?" "The kind," I said, "that helps people learn not to make plans about others without asking first." She smiled back. "Kids don't always understand everything we say, but they feel the tone." And I meant every syllable. Inside me, something ancient stirred. Not rage, not fear, clarity. They didn't know I'd overheard Sabrina 2 nights earlier on the phone, whispering about something called a power of attorney. They didn't know I'd already noticed small charges showing up in my bank statements, items I hadn't bought, cards I hadn't used. They didn't know the papers they left out on the desk weren't as invisible as they hoped they were. They didn't know I had once helped a dozen elderly patients protect themselves from their own families. They didn't know who I used to be, but they were about to find out. I stood up, poured the tea into my old metal thermos, and set it in my bag. Inside was the blue folder I'd begun filling in silence. Bank statements, insurance copies, my original will, and my journal. I'd been writing everything down. Dates, conversations, expressions. My husband used to say, "Joe, you remember too much." Maybe I do. But sometimes, remembering is survival. I held Emma's hand as we walked toward the front door. I told her we were just going to the corner cafe. In truth, we were headed to meet someone. Someone who knew how to write a different kind of story. Because when Nathan and Sabrina returned from their errands, they found the teacup still warm on the table. But I was not who I'd been when they left. And nothing, not the house, not the savings, not even the silence they mistook for weakness, was going to be theirs to control anymore. Because while they were planning behind my back, I was preparing for the day I'd stop turning mine. The thing about sudden deaths is they never give you time to ask one last question. Frank left the house at 6:42 in the morning. He always walked the same loop through the neighborhood park. 40 minutes, give or take. It was routine, predictable, safe. I'd just poured the first cup of coffee when the phone rang. It was a number I didn't recognize. I answered anyway. The paramedic on the other end had a calm voice, which made the words sound even colder. Cardiac arrest, no pulse when they arrived, no chance to revive. It took longer to boil the kettle than it did for my life to change forever. Frank Whitfield, my husband of 44 years, was gone. I didn't cry at first. I remember that clearly. I folded the dish rag he left on the counter. I cleaned his coffee mug. I straightened the shoes he left by the door. I moved like a woman keeping time for a song that had already ended. The funeral was quiet, just the way he would have liked it. Nathan spoke. So did the pastor. Emma, just 4 years old then, laid a daisy on his coffin and asked if Grandpa was going to visit in her dreams. I said yes, because lies can be kind. The weeks afterward passed in pieces. The house, our house, had grown too still. I heard Frank everywhere. The creak of the second stair, the whistle from the window in the kitchen, the rhythm of his toothbrush in the bathroom before bed. But none of it was real. Grief is strange like that. It can echo louder than life. 4 months later, Nathan came by. He brought Emma and Sabrina. They stayed for dinner, though Sabrina barely touched her plate. After dessert, Nathan said, "Mom, have you thought about selling the house?" I looked up. The suggestion hadn't surprised me, but the timing did. He continued, "I mean, it's a lot to manage alone. And with you all the way out here, what if something happened?" I stayed quiet. I was still holding my fork. "Look," he said, "Emma would love having her grandma around. You could stay with us. We'd help with everything. You won't be alone anymore." That part, not being alone, hit a nerve. I didn't agree that night, but the seed was planted, and loneliness has a way of watering things you wouldn't otherwise grow. I kept thinking about the house. This house. We bought it the year Frank returned from the Navy. 2 bedrooms, wood siding, a fireplace he insisted on fixing himself. We'd raised Nathan here, hosted Thanksgivings, celebrated our 25th anniversary with plastic balloons over the front porch. There was a dent in the kitchen floor where Frank had dropped the toolbox the day we found out I was pregnant. A burn mark on the back deck. From that time, we tried to roast marshmallows, and the wind had other plans. This house was not just wood and nails. It was a map of our life. But Nathan was right about one thing. It was too much for one person. And I was tired of the silence. The for sale sign went up 2 weeks later. The realtor called it a charming retirement gem. It sold in under a week. I remember watching the moving truck pull away from the driveway. The curtains were drawn, but I could still see the shadow of the window Frank had once painted blue. I carried just one box with me to Nathan's place. Inside, it was my Bible, a recipe book, a photo album, and the silver frame Frank gave me on our 40th anniversary. It was a photo of us standing by the fence post in the backyard, his arm around me, my face half turned toward him, mid-laugh. That picture came with me. Wherever I went, it would stay on the mantel. In Nathan's house, it sat above the fake fireplace. Same frame, same smile, but something about the way it sat there, in someone else's house, on someone else's mantel, felt wrong. Sabrina placed it there, actually. Said it added warmth, but she didn't ask where I wanted it. No one did. I told myself I was overthinking things. They meant well. They just didn't know how to say it. But when someone moves you into their house like a guest, not family, you feel it. You notice the way they shut the door just a little too softly after you walk away. The way conversations pause when you enter the room. The way they say, "It's only temporary, right?" But never say what temporary means. Still, I tried. I cooked. I cleaned. I picked Emma up from school, helped with her homework, kissed her forehead every night. But I stopped being someone's wife and started being someone's burden. And that silver frame, it kept watching everything from the mantel. Like Frank knew what was coming long before I did. It didn't happen all at once. There was no big confrontation, no yelling, no slammed doors or cruel words. That would have been easier, in a strange way. At least then, I would have known exactly what I was dealing with. No, the shift was quiet, subtle, the kind of thing you don't notice until one day you look around and realize you don't belong. It started with the laundry. I was folding Nathan's socks one afternoon when I realized I didn't remember being asked. Not once had anyone said, "Mom, could you help with this?" I just started doing it because that's what I'd always done. Because I thought, that's what mothers do. But it didn't stop there. I cooked dinner most nights, cleaned up after, helped Emma with homework. Somewhere along the way, my role had shifted from guest to domestic help. Only no one mentioned it. They just let it happen. Sabrina, in particular, had become distant, polite, always, but cold in the way that made even warm words feel like glass. She used to thank me when I watched Emma. Now she just texted me the pickup times. And then there were the little things. The way she'd say, "Oh, Joanna probably doesn't want to go to book club again. She's been tired lately." Or, "The church ladies called, but I told them you were resting. Hope that's okay." I hadn't said I was tired. I hadn't been resting. What I had been was erased. At first, I made excuses for her. She's busy, overwhelmed. Maybe she didn't mean anything by it. But it kept happening. The women from church stopped calling. The neighborhood events went by without invitations. It was like someone had quietly closed the door on the world I used to know and locked it from the outside. One Thursday evening, I overheard something that froze me in place. I was heading to the kitchen from the hallway. The door to Nathan and Sabrina's home office was slightly ajar. Their voices were low, but distinct. Nathan said, "If Mom signs the property transfer now, while she's still sharp, it'll be cleaner. You know how messy these things get if someone's health declines. Better now than after." Sabrina replied, "She won't suspect anything if we make it sound like we're just planning ahead." Use Emma as the reason I stood there, not breathing, not thinking, just listening, letting the words wrap around my chest like a tightening belt. If Mom signs the property transfer, now. I backed away from the door, slowly. The hallway felt colder than it had seconds before. I didn't say anything that night, or the next. I kept folding laundry, stirring soup, reading stories to Emma, but I started writing things down. Times, dates, phrases. I kept a small notebook in my room and wrote everything in it, even the way Sabrina started correcting Emma when she called me Grandma. "Just call her Jojo. It's more modern," she'd said one day. Jojo. Like I was a cartoon sidekick. Like Grandma was too old, too real, too inconvenient. I smiled through it all, because that's what they expected. That I would smile, that I would not question, that I would remain grateful for the generosity of being allowed a room in their house. But they were wrong about me. Frank used to say I had a quiet grit, a kind of strength that didn't need to shout to be heard. And he was right, because I was listening, watching, preparing. They were busy making their plans. But what they didn't realize was that so was I. And when the time came, I wouldn't raise my voice. I wouldn't argue. I would simply stand, and everything would change. Emma was the light in that house. In a space that grew colder with every passing week, she remained warm, unaffected by the adult silence swirling around her. She was 7 then, smart in a quiet way, the kind of child who didn't interrupt, but noticed everything. She had her father's eyes, but her heart, that was something else entirely. Soft, wide open, and always reaching for connection. Every morning, she'd tiptoe into my room in her socks and crawl under the blanket beside me. Sometimes we'd just lay there, staring at the ceiling. Sometimes she'd ask questions that made me pause. "Grandma, did you have a favorite color when you were little? Did Grandpa know how to make pancakes? Do you think clouds get tired from holding all the rain?" And one morning, out of nowhere, she whispered, "You're the only one who always has time for me." I didn't say anything at first. I just held her tighter, because that sentence, from the mouth of a 7-year-old, broke something soft inside me. Children don't understand time in the way adults do. They understand presence, attention, being chosen. And in that house, filled with planners and deadlines and whispered conversations, I was the only one who slowed down enough to hear her. I kept all her little notes, the drawings, the paper crowns she made for me when I was queen of the reading corner. But there was one drawing that changed something in me, and not in the way she intended. It was a Thursday afternoon. Rain had kept us indoors. Emma had spent most of the day at the kitchen table, her crayons spread like confetti across the surface. She worked for nearly an hour in deep concentration. When she finished, she ran to me, eyes wide with pride. "I made something for you," she said. It was a drawing of our family, crayon figures, 5 in total: Nathan, Sabrina, Emma, their cat Pickles, and me. They stood in front of the house, big smiles, big hands, bright clothes, and there I was, a tiny figure off to the side, smaller than the cat. My smile was there. So were my gray curls. She'd drawn me holding a teacup. But I wasn't with them. Not really. I was near. Close by. But not in the center. Not even in the frame. I thanked her, of course. I praised the colors, the details, the way she remembered to draw my necklace. But that picture stayed with me long after she skipped away. I stared at it later that night. Once the house was quiet and still. And I realized Emma had simply drawn what she saw. In her world, I wasn't central. I wasn't part of the story in the same way the others were. I was the helper, the watcher, the tea maker, present, but peripheral. She hadn't meant to hurt me. In fact, I think she thought she was honoring me, giving me my own little space. But that drawing cut through me more deeply than any argument could have. Because it wasn't just paper, it was a mirror. And in that mirror, I saw myself as I'd become, reduced, repositioned, resized. Not just in Emma's eyes, but in everyone else's, and worst of all, in my own. I'd allowed it, little by little, in the name of love, in the name of sacrifice, in the name of being helpful. But love shouldn't make you disappear. That night, I took the drawing and placed it in the drawer beside my bed. Not to forget it, but to remember. To remember how even the most innocent reflections can show us truths we've been trying not to see. Emma still crawled into bed the next morning, still asked about clouds and pancakes and favorite colors. But I answered her differently now, with more care, more pause, because I'd seen something, and once seen, it couldn't be unseen. It happened on a Tuesday. The sky was overcast, the kind of gray that seeps into everything. The windows, the walls, the skin behind your eyes. I was pouring tea, the usual afternoon ritual. 2 cups, one for me, one for Emma. She liked hers with honey and just a splash of milk. She was drawing again, folded over the dining table, her little legs swinging under the chair. Nathan came in from the hallway, car keys already in hand. "We've got a couple errands," he said, flashing that smile again. The one that didn't quite reach his eyes. "Shouldn't be too long." "Mom, think you can hang out with Emma a little longer?" "Of course," I said, setting down the sugar spoon. Sabrina followed behind, adjusting her coat collar, phone pressed to her ear. She gave me a quick wave without looking up. Emma barely glanced up. "Bye, Mommy. Bye, Daddy." And then it was quiet again. I returned to the kitchen to grab the teapot. As I poured into our mugs, Emma's voice came behind me. Low, careful. "Grandma," she said, "they're making plans behind your back." I stopped mid-pour. Not from shock, just from, wait. The sound of the tea hitting porcelain had covered her first few words, but the silence after hung heavy in the air. I turned around slowly. She was still drawing, head down, focused, like she hadn't just opened a door I hadn't yet dared peek behind. "What did you say, sweetheart?" I asked gently. She looked up, her eyes uncertain, as though she'd already said too much. I heard Mommy and Daddy talking last night. They didn't know I was still awake." "What were they talking about?" She hesitated. "They said something about your house. And the bank. Daddy said it would be easier if you signed something before you got too old. Mommy said it would help everything move faster." I nodded slowly, setting the teapot down on the counter. Then I walked over, picked up my cup, and took a long sip. I didn't ask more, not because I didn't want to know, because I already did. They were making plans. I'd felt it in the way they glanced at each other during dinner, the way conversations paused when I walked in, the way Sabrina had once accidentally left a real estate brochure folded open on the kitchen counter, on a page about intergenerational asset planning. But hearing it from Emma, in that pure, unfiltered tone only children possess, made it real. "They're making plans behind your back." The words echoed, not just in my ears, in my bones. I smiled at her. "Thank you for telling me, baby," I said. She nodded and went back to her coloring. Once she was focused again, I stood up and made my way to my bedroom. Quietly, calmly. I pulled my laptop from under the bed, the place I kept it when I didn't want Sabrina tidying things out of place. I logged into my online bank account. The balance was still there, at least what I expected of it, but something felt off. I clicked through the last 3 months of statements. There were transfers, small at first, then larger, always pending authorization, always routed to joint accounts. I didn't remember authorizing any joint accounts. I clicked into one note labeled Property Transfer Legal Consult. $1,000. Billed to a local firm I didn't recognize. I typed the firm's name into the search bar. The website loaded: estate law, elder planning, title consulting. And there it was. Under recent clients, a small testimonial from Sabrina's LinkedIn profile. Dated just a week earlier. My heart didn't race. My hands didn't shake. I just stared, letting the truth settle over me like dust. This wasn't some future discussion. They weren't thinking about talking to me. They were already moving forward. They were making decisions, drawing lines, spending money. And I was supposed to smile. Keep folding laundry. Keep picking Emma up from school. Keep pouring tea. I closed the laptop, stood, and walked back to the kitchen. Emma looked up as I sat down beside her again. "I like the dress you drew on me," I said, pointing to her sketch. She grinned. Inside, something shifted. Not anger, not yet, but clarity. They had made plans behind my back. Now it was my turn. Some decisions don't come with fireworks. They don't demand shouting, or fists pounding on tables, or long emotional speeches. Some decisions come the way winter does, slow, inevitable, and coldly clarifying. That morning, I woke early. Emma was still asleep, curled like a comma under her quilt. The house was quiet. Too quiet. I didn't bother making tea. Instead, I walked to the window and stood there for a long moment, watching the light spread across the street. Then I reached for my phone. I hadn't spoken to her in years, not since Frank passed. But I still had her number, handwritten in his old address book, the one I kept tucked inside my Bible. Her name was Amelia Grant. She was Frank's attorney for over 2 decades, helped him draft our wills, manage his retirement funds, and handle the paperwork after he got sick. Amelia was sharp, the kind of woman who never wasted a word. And more importantly, she was someone I trusted. I dialed. "Amelia? This is Joanna Whitfield." There was a pause. Then her voice, warm, surprised. "Joanna. My goodness, it's been a while. How are you?" I sat down at the edge of the bed. "I need your help," I said. "It's about the house." Within the hour, we met at her office. Same brick building off Maple Street, same framed certificates lining the walls, same coffee machine humming in the corner like it had 12 years ago. Amelia greeted me at the door. She hadn't changed much. Still in pressed slacks and a crisp blouse, hair pulled neatly into a bun that meant business. She poured us each a cup of coffee, then leaned in. "Tell me everything." So I did, about the whispers, the bank transfers, the real estate consultations I hadn't approved, about Emma's quiet voice, about Sabrina's cold distance and Nathan's assumption that I wouldn't know what was being done until it was too late. Amelia didn't interrupt. She just listened, took notes, asked for a few key documents, which I'd brought in a manila folder. When I finished, she set her pen down. "Joanna, you're still listed as the sole legal owner of your home." I exhaled slowly. That was a start. "But," she continued, "Nathan has submitted preliminary forms requesting financial power of attorney, under the claim that you're beginning to experience minor memory lapses. He's also scheduled a consult with a notary to initiate a transfer of deed under the guise of estate simplification." My fingers curled around the edge of the folder. I wasn't angry, not visibly, but inside, something settled, a kind of calm that didn't shake anymore. "And the accounts?" I asked. She nodded. He's attempted to list himself as a co-signer on at least 2 of them. He's close, Joanna. If you hadn't come to me now, he might have succeeded by next month. That was enough. I didn't need more confirmation. I'd seen what I needed to see. Then let's stop this, I said quietly. Today. Amelia smiled. It wasn't unkind, but it was fierce. That's what I like to hear. Over the next 3 hours, we took back everything, step by step. First, we revoked Nathan's pending power of attorney application. Next, I transferred all my savings and retirement accounts to a new bank, one neither he nor Sabrina knew existed. Then, we began drafting a new will, a real one that reflected not just legal structures, but the reality of what my life had become. I asked that everything, every penny, every asset, every book on my shelf, be placed in a living trust for Emma, to be inherited only when she turned 25, with clauses to protect her, even from her own parents. Finally, I signed a formal statement of mental competency, witnessed by Amelia and 2 staff members, notarized on the spot. Amelia slid the last document into her folder. "It's done," she said. "They can't touch you now." I didn't smile. I didn't cry. I just breathed. For the first time in months, I could breathe. Before I left, I walked to the window of her office. The streets looked the same as they had when Frank and I used to park out front during appointments. I thought of him then, what he'd say if he could see all of this. If he'd be proud, if he'd be heartbroken, maybe both. Amelia touched my shoulder gently. "You did the right thing, Joanna." I nodded. "I know." As I stepped back outside into the early afternoon light, I didn't feel victorious. I felt ready. They had made plans behind my back, but now I had one of my own. The pen felt heavier than it should have, not in weight, but in meaning. Amelia laid out the final version of the new will. The pages were crisp, fresh, and unburdened by assumptions. I ran my fingers over the cover as if touching the future, Emma's future. She sat across from me, watching carefully. "Whenever you're ready, Joanna," she said gently. "There's no pressure." But this one, it undoes the previous version completely. I nodded. The previous version. I remembered it well. Frank and I had drafted it together years ago. Back then, Nathan was still the son we believed in. He was raising a family, building a career, saying the right things, and Emma hadn't even been born. We had no reason to doubt, no reason to think the child we raised with every bit of love we could muster would one day see us as stepping stones to his own comfort. That will had left everything to Nathan. The house, the pension, the savings, the books Frank loved so much. We assumed he would care. We assumed wrong. As I looked down at the new document, a strange calm filled me. "This trust," Amelia explained, tapping a section, "will hold all your assets. The house, your bank accounts, the mutual funds. Everything will be in the name of the Whitfield Family Trust. You are the current trustee until you pass. At that time, the sole beneficiary becomes your granddaughter, Emma Whitfield." I nodded again. "And no one else?" I asked. I needed to hear it out loud. "No one else," Amelia confirmed. "No disbursement to Nathan, to Sabrina, to any other living relatives. You've chosen to leave it all to Emma. She'll receive it in full when she turns 25, unless you amend it again." I signed the first page, then the second, and the third. I could feel something release in me, a weight I hadn't even known I'd been carrying. It was like untying a knot that had been buried beneath years of trying to justify what couldn't be justified anymore. I wasn't doing this out of spite. I wasn't doing it for revenge. I was doing it because there comes a moment when love must grow a spine, when protection becomes the only form of love left to give. Emma was still a child. She didn't yet understand the web being spun around her. But one day, she would. And on that day, I didn't want her to feel abandoned. I wanted her to know someone had seen the shadows creeping in and lit a match in the dark. Amelia pushed one more page toward me, a handwritten letter I'd asked her to attach to the trust. For Emma, I said softly, more to myself than to her. Something she can read when she's ready. The letter wasn't long. It didn't blame. It didn't accuse. It simply told her the truth, that life is often complicated, that family isn't always fair, and that she, Emma, was always the light I chose to walk toward, and that she was never, not for a second, forgotten. I sealed it in an envelope, signed the back, and pressed it into the folder with everything else. Amelia gathered the documents. "You've done something important today," she said. "You've given her a chance." I stood up. My knees ached a little. A gentle reminder that time was moving forward with or without my consent. Before I left, I looked around the office one last time. The same office where Frank and I had sat as a team, dreaming of what we could leave behind. Funny. Back then, it was about legacy. Now it was about protection. As I stepped outside, the afternoon air was brisk. Leaves had started falling. The early kind, crisp and dry. I closed my coat around me and stood on the sidewalk a moment, watching the wind carry one golden leaf down the street. My son had made his choices, and so had I. He had chosen entitlement. I had chosen preservation. He saw my life as something to inherit. I saw Emma's life as something to shield. Sometimes we don't get to change the past, but we can choose who inherits the pieces. And this time, I chose her. The roast was in the oven. I could smell the garlic and rosemary threading through the air, blending with the low hum of the dishwasher and the faint rustle of Emma coloring at the kitchen table. Her little feet swung rhythmically, not quite touching the floor. It was Nathan's favorite, the herb-crusted pork loin I used to make on Sunday evenings when he still lived, under this roof. Back then, he'd come to the kitchen and sneak bites straight from the pan, laughing when I'd tap his hand with the spatula. Tonight, I was making it again. Not to comfort, not to celebrate, but to say goodbye. He didn't know that, of course. Neither did Sabrina. They'd returned only 2 hours ago, dragging 2 overpacked suitcases and Emma's pink backpack. Sabrina had already resumed her usual air of controlled chaos, sighing at the laundry, eyeing the pantry, inspecting the thermostat like she owned the walls. Nathan came in with a bottle of red and that same grin that used to disarm me. "Smells like my childhood in here," he said, setting the wine down. "You didn't have to go all out, Mom." But I did, because this was the last dinner I would ever cook for him in this house. "I thought you'd enjoy something familiar," I said evenly, my voice calm. He poured us each a glass, swirling his as if he knew something about wine beyond the label. Sabrina sat at the head of the table like it had always belonged to her. And Emma? She quietly took her usual seat beside me, giving my hand a gentle squeeze under the table. We ate slowly. The air felt warm, almost festive, except I knew better. The laughter, the stories, the clinking glasses. It was all noise, a cover for what they didn't know had already happened. Just hours earlier, I had signed over every right, changed every password, moved every cent, transferred every title. They were sitting in a house that no longer had their fingerprints on any legal document. They were drinking wine in a dining room that would never be theirs. They were laughing as if they had won. But I had already played the final card. "You know," Nathan said between bites, "I've been thinking, maybe it's time we made some upgrades to the kitchen. Open concept, knock down that wall, add an island." Sabrina jumped in. "And the upstairs bathroom," she said. "Emma's getting older. She needs her own vanity." I stirred my peas with my fork, nodding slowly. "Oh, you've been planning all that?" Nathan shrugged. "Just ideas. I mean, once things are formalized with the paperwork, we'll take care of everything. You'll still live here, of course. It'll always be home. Just a little more modern." I looked at Emma. She was watching me now, carefully, as if she knew this wasn't just another dinner. "Sounds like you two have a vision," I said softly. Nathan smiled. They had no clue, not a single inkling that the very documents they were waiting on had already been shredded and rewritten, down to the last line. And that the only name that now mattered was Emma's. As I cleared the plates, I took a longer look around the kitchen. At the cabinets Frank had built himself, the crooked tile near the pantry, the dent in the oven door from when Nathan accidentally kicked it during a tantrum. It wasn't a perfect home, but it had been ours. And now, it was hers, Emma's, just not in the way they expected. Nathan offered to help with the dishes. I declined. Sabrina was already back on her phone, likely texting someone about new fixtures or countertops. When I returned to the table with slices of apple pie, I let my gaze settle on the two of them. Two adults who had once been children I held, protected, prayed over. Now, strangers. Polished smiles, carefully rehearsed tones, and beneath it all, entitlement disguised as concern. They didn't know this was a funeral of sorts, not for a person, but for an illusion. The illusion that I would always comply, that I would always fold, that I hadn't been watching. I had. And tonight, I was saying goodbye. Not with shouting, not with tears, but with roast pork, warm pie, and silence sharper than knives. It was after dinner. Emma had gone upstairs to brush her teeth. The house was unusually quiet, the kind of quiet you could hear your own thoughts in. I was sitting in my armchair by the fireplace, the same one Frank used to fall asleep in with the TV still murmuring. That's when Nathan walked in. Sabrina followed, carrying 2 mugs of chamomile tea like some peace offering. They sat on the couch across from me, too upright, too formal. My hand tightened around the handkerchief in my lap, the one Frank had embroidered for me the week of our wedding, initials stitched in a soft loop, J and F, always. I smoothed its corner. Nathan cleared his throat. "Mom, we were wondering if we could talk with you. Just, seriously." Heart to heart, I nodded, saying nothing. I had been expecting this. They just didn't know that I already had my answer. He glanced at Sabrina, who gave him that encouraging look, the kind people give toddlers before they recite their first poem. Nathan turned back to me. "We've been thinking a lot about your future," he began, with the soft concern of someone about to sell you something, and about how things might get harder for you down the road. Physically, financially, emotionally, I waited. Sabrina jumped in, and we just feel that now, while you're still sharp and mobile, is the best time to take steps that'll protect you and give you peace of mind. "Steps," I repeated, tilting my head slightly. "Yes," Nathan said, "like finalizing the transfer of the house deed and the investment accounts. We can put them under both our names, just to make sure everything's managed well. You'll still live here, of course. Nothing changes day to day. Except everything would. Sabrina leaned forward, hands clasped like she was at a job interview. I know it sounds like a lot, but this way, you won't ever have to worry. If something happens, we'll be in a position to act immediately. No courts, no confusion. They were rehearsed. This wasn't spontaneous. They'd practiced this conversation. Nathan reached into his pocket and pulled out a folded envelope. These are just preliminary documents, nothing binding. We wanted to show good faith I didn't reach for it. Instead, I glanced down at the handkerchief again. Frank had stitched that on a Wednesday night, sitting at the kitchen table while I made lemon bars. He had pricked his thumb, cursed under his breath, and still smiled when he gave it to me the next morning. That square of cotton had been in my hospital bag when I gave birth. In my purse at his funeral. Now it was in my hand, steady and calm. I looked up. "You've thought about my future?" I asked gently. Nathan nodded. "We want what's best for you, Mom." Sabrina echoed, "Of course." Always, I smiled. Then slowly, I folded the handkerchief in half and placed it on the armrest beside me. "I've thought about my future, too," I said quietly. Nathan smiled, assuming victory. "I've thought about it long and hard. And I've come to a decision." Sabrina leaned in. "That's wonderful. What did you decide?" I looked at them both, their expectant faces, their faux compassion, the hunger behind their concern, and I said, with a voice as still as the snow that once fell the night Frank proposed, "I decided my future doesn't include either of you." The room froze. Nathan blinked. "What?" I stood. "Don't worry about the paperwork. It's been taken care of, the house, the accounts, the estate." Sabrina's smile faltered. "Wait, what do you mean?" I walked to the mantel, placing the folded handkerchief beside Frank's photo. "It means the conversation you came here to have is already outdated." Nathan stood now, voice rising. "You're making a mistake. You can't just—" "I can," I said, turning to face him. And I did. For once, I didn't wait for permission to protect myself. Sabrina's voice turned sharp. "This isn't rational." I tilted my head. "Neither is betrayal." The next morning, I asked Nathan and Sabrina to be home by 4 p.m. "I just need a bit of your time," I said softly. "There are some documents I'd like to go over." Nathan hesitated. Sabrina was unusually quiet, but they nodded. By 3:30, I had everything set on the dining room table, the same table where Frank and I had celebrated birthdays, Thanksgiving dinners, and little triumphs over the years. I laid out the documents, neatly stacked, each clipped and labeled. Then, I placed a cup of herbal tea at the head of the table. For Amelia. At 3:50 p.m., her car pulled up. She stepped out, dressed in her usual tailored gray slacks and calm authority. She looked like she had stepped out of a courtroom, which, knowing her, she might have. Nathan opened the door and froze. "Amelia?" His voice cracked just slightly. "Hello, Nathan," she said with professional courtesy. "Joanna invited me." Sabrina appeared behind him, and her whole body went still. I greeted Amelia with a warm hug. "Thank you for coming." "Dear," she smiled. "Always." We sat down at the table. Nathan remained standing. "What is this about?" he asked, eyes darting to the folders. Sabrina stepped forward, arms crossed. I slid the first folder toward them. "Let's start here." Nathan reluctantly picked it up. As he skimmed the front page, the color in his face shifted. Sabrina leaned over to look. Her face tightened. "It's a..." Revocation of power of attorney? Nathan asked. Yes, I said calmly. Effective immediately. You are no longer authorized to make any decisions on my behalf, financial, medical, or otherwise. But, I held up my hand. No arguments today, just understanding. I slid the second folder forward. These are the most recent bank statements. As you can see, all my assets have been moved into new accounts. Protected and independently monitored. Sabrina's lips parted, but no sound came out. And finally, I said, tapping the last document, my updated will. Amelia has a copy on file. Emma is now the sole beneficiary. Nathan stepped back, as if he'd been slapped. You can't be serious. I'm entirely serious. Sabrina scoffed. This is vindictive. No, I replied, my voice unwavering. This is protective. Amelia finally spoke. We've also gathered a detailed record of the past 6 months. Phone recordings, bank transfers, text messages requesting large sums, some of which were made under emotional duress. Nathan's jaw clenched. You've been spying on us? We've been documenting, Amelia replied coolly. There's a legal distinction. Sabrina sat down now, her face pale. I looked at her, then at my son. I gave you everything, I said. Not just money. My time, my trust, my peace of mind. And you used that to isolate me, to control access to my own life. You're overreacting, Nathan muttered. No, Amelia said firmly. You've been exploiting your mother. And the law is very clear about financial abuse of an elder. They were silent. Amelia continued. We're not pressing charges at this time, but any further coercion, threats, or manipulation will be met with full legal response. Nathan looked at me with something like betrayal in his eyes. Sabrina whispered, You think we're monsters. I met her gaze evenly. I think you lost your way, and I won't let your path take me down with it. I stood. This house, the one Frank built, the one where Emma took her first steps, it's not a nest to be plundered. It's a legacy, and it will be protected. Amelia stood beside me, firm and steady. Sabrina buried her face in her hands. Nathan stared at the table like the wood grain might offer him an escape. I leaned down and gently picked up the photo of Frank from the mantel, holding it for a moment. I'm not doing this out of anger, I said. I'm doing this out of love. For myself, for the woman your father loved, for the little girl upstairs who still believes families should be safe. Amelia reached for her folder. We're done here. Nathan slammed his fist against the side of the dining table. This is unbelievable, he shouted, his voice raw with fury. You're kicking us out of our own house? His face, usually calm and composed, twisted into something unfamiliar, something sharp. The cracks in his mask were finally visible. Sabrina gasped and covered her mouth, eyes wide in disbelief. This isn't your house, I said softly, but firmly. It never was. Nathan stepped toward me. So what? You just decided to humiliate us? After everything we've done for you? Everything you've done to me, Nathan, I corrected, locking eyes with him. Not for me. Sabrina suddenly burst into tears, grabbing his arm. Nathan, please, just stop. She turned to me, her voice trembling. Joanna, we're sorry. Okay? We messed up. We didn't mean to hurt you. I waited. She kept talking, hands gesturing, mascara running. We were in a really tough place. Nathan got into this business deal, and the guy vanished. Took almost $70,000 with him. Then the credit card debt started building, and instead of talking to me, I said gently, you saw me as the easiest fix. Nathan scoffed. We were trying to protect you. Sabrina nodded quickly. Yes, that's all it was. We just wanted to make sure you didn't fall into the wrong hands. The only hands reaching into my life, I said, were yours. They fell silent. I walked over to the fireplace and picked up Emma's drawing. A crayon sun, a smiling stick figure grandma, a house with a red roof. I held it up. She sees this house as my home. The place where her grandma loves her, reads stories, plants tomatoes. But somewhere along the way, you two turned it into a vault. Nathan's voice cracked again. You don't get it. We were drowning. I do get it, I said calmly. More than you know. Sabrina stepped forward, her expression desperate. We weren't trying to hurt you. We were trying to survive. I'm not unsympathetic, I said, but sympathy isn't permission. She blinked. What? You don't get to cross boundaries and then beg for forgiveness while still standing on the wrong side of them. Nathan's fists clenched. So this is it? You're throwing us out? Just like that? I shook my head. No, I'm not throwing you out. He paused. Sabrina looked confused. You're not? I set Emma's drawing gently back on the mantel. I'm simply telling you the truth. This house belongs to me. The money you used to rely on is no longer yours to touch. The access you once had is gone. Sabrina whispered, but where are we supposed to go? I don't know, I replied. That's for you two to figure out. The same way I figured out how to survive after Frank died. After raising you. After being alone in this house with nothing but creaking floors and fading photos. Nathan sat down suddenly, like the weight of it all finally caught up. We didn't mean to become people who used you. But you did, I said, not cruelly, just clearly. I took a breath, then added, You're not being punished. You're just no longer being enabled. Sabrina wiped her face, sniffling. I kept telling him to stop asking you for more. I felt so guilty every time you gave us something, and I couldn't even look you in the eyes. I nodded. Then this is your moment to start looking again. Eyes up. No more hiding behind sweet words and empty apologies. Nathan looked up at me, quieter now. So, what happens next? You have 24 hours to make arrangements. Amelia has advised me to keep this transition peaceful. There's no need for the police. But the locks will change. The passwords have already changed. He looked down. I walked to the dining table, picked up the last untouched cup of tea, and cradled it in my hands. You're not being kicked out, I said. You're simply no longer welcome to treat me like an ATM in my own home. They didn't argue. For the first time in months, maybe years, there was silence. Not the kind laced with tension, the kind that follows truth. I didn't leave in anger. I left in silence. The kind of silence that doesn't slam doors or echo through empty hallways. The kind that breathes. It took me 4 days to pack everything. Not because I had too much, quite the opposite. Years of giving and sacrificing had stripped me down to the essentials. A few books, my mother's china set, old letters from Frank, a faded photograph of Emma in a sunflower dress. I didn't tell anyone. No grand announcement, no drama, no notes left on the table. I quietly rented a small apartment about 8 blocks from Emma's school. Just 1 bedroom, a tiny balcony, and a kitchen that smelled like old lemons and wood polish. It was nothing compared to the big house with polished oak floors and a fireplace that hadn't been lit in years. But it was mine, and for the first time in a very long time, so was my peace. I remember the night before I left. I sat in the garden one last time. The moonlight touched the roses I had planted with my own hands, and for a moment, I let myself grieve. Not just for the home, but for the dreams I had attached to it. Dreams of growing old with love still present in every corner. Dreams of being surrounded by warmth, not walls. Dreams of being seen. But grief doesn't get the final word. Freedom does. The morning I left, I brewed a single cup of tea, fed the last of the crumbs to the birds by the kitchen window, and rolled my small suitcase through the hallway. Each wheel turn felt like punctuation to a sentence I had been afraid to finish. The sun hadn't fully risen yet. Nathan and Sabrina were still asleep, or pretending to be. I didn't care. The keys were left on the marble counter, the same counter where they once asked me to co-sign the second mortgage. I locked the door one last time and stepped outside. The air was crisp, and I felt it in my chest. Not like a chill, but like a cleansing breath. People think leaving is the hard part. It's not. The hard part is staying when your soul is begging you to go. As the taxi pulled away from the curb, I looked back. Not with regret, just one final glance for the woman I used to be in that house. The woman who kept giving because she thought love was earned through sacrifice. I now know that's not true. Love, real love, doesn't ask you to disappear to be worthy of it. It sees you. It holds you. It keeps you whole. The driver didn't ask questions, just nodded as I gave him the address. He said, "Starting fresh, huh?" I smiled. Yes, something like that. The ride was quiet. My thoughts drifted between past and present, pain and release. I thought about Emma, how she whispered to me, how she saw what others couldn't. I thought about Frank, how he always said, "When people show you who they are, believe them the first time." And I thought about myself, this older woman with silver in her hair and a heart that had been broken, reshaped, and was now being reclaimed. We arrived at the building. The landlord met me with keys and a smile. I climbed 2 flights of stairs with no help, slowly but surely. Inside, the space was small but warm. The kind of warm that doesn't come from square footage, but from possibility. I unpacked quietly, hung up Emma's drawing on the fridge with a flower magnet, put on a pot of tea. Then I sat by the window. Outside, the street was alive with sounds, a little messy, a little chaotic, but real. And I whispered to myself, not bitter, just true. I didn't leave because I was pushed out. I left because I finally had the strength to walk out on my own. I didn't lose a home. I reclaimed my freedom. And in that stillness, I knew I wasn't just surviving anymore. I was beginning again. My new apartment wasn't fancy. It didn't have polished floors or marble countertops, but it had light and silence and a little window that looked out over the park across the street, where children laughed, dogs barked, and old men played chess under trees that dropped golden leaves. I had never realized how deeply I missed the sound of life simply happening. I chose a soft green for the curtains, the color of hope, I suppose. I filled the space with secondhand treasures, a kettle that whistled like the one Frank used to tease me about, a bookshelf from a nearby thrift store, a quilt with uneven stitching that reminded me of home. I allowed myself to sit still, to breathe, to not be needed. It was strange at first. For decades, I had lived for others. Every meal I cooked, every holiday I planned, every loan I co-signed, every time I bit my tongue, it was all for them. But in that little apartment, I picked up my pen again. The old leather-bound journal sat on the desk like an old friend. I opened it and wrote, Day 1. I am no longer anyone's backup plan, emergency fund, or built-in babysitter. I am Joanna again. Just Joanna. The words felt fragile but true. I kept writing the next day, and the next. It became my morning ritual. Tea in one hand, pen in the other. Eventually, I found the courage to walk past the senior center near the park. They were offering a watercolor class for older adults. I stood by the door for a moment, uncertain. But something inside me whispered, You left your prison. Don't be afraid to live free. So I walked in. The instructor, a woman in her 60s with red glasses and a messy ponytail, welcomed me like I'd always belonged. I sat beside a man named George, who painted blurry boats and told long stories that always ended with a joke. I wasn't good at it, not yet, but I loved the feel of the brush against paper, the way color moved without permission, the freedom in not needing to be perfect. I was learning to create again, not just fix. One Thursday afternoon, after class, I wandered into the local library. It was quiet, filled with that soft scent of old books and warmth. I was browsing the memoir section when I overheard a gentle voice behind me say, First time here? I turned. An older woman, maybe in her 70s, stood with a tote bag full of paperbacks and eyes that carried both storms and sunshine. Yes, I said. I just moved nearby. She smiled. I'm Claire. We run a book circle here on Saturdays. Nothing fancy, just stories, tea, and the occasional heated debate about character arcs. Something about her presence felt anchoring. I nodded. That sounds lovely. Claire tilted her head slightly. You look like someone who's just come through something. I hesitated, then replied, I suppose I have. She didn't press, just offered a soft nod. You're not alone. You'd be surprised how many women end up rebuilding after being told their value expired. I joined the reading circle that Saturday. They welcomed me with a mismatched teacup and a chair that creaked. Claire introduced me, and we began discussing a novel about a woman who left her entire life behind to live by the sea. Halfway through, Claire shared her story. She had raised 4 kids, given up her career, took care of her dying husband for 6 years. Then, one spring morning, her eldest son asked her to temporarily sign the house over for a business deal. He never gave it back. She was living in her car when the library staff found her sleeping in the parking lot. They gave her a volunteer position, then a part-time job. And now, 5 years later, she ran the most loved book circle in the county. Her voice didn't tremble as she spoke. There was no bitterness, only quiet, radiant clarity. After everyone left, she looked at me and said, You don't have to tell your story now, but when you're ready, we'll be here. I walked home that evening under falling leaves, and for the first time in a long time, I didn't feel empty. I felt rooted, seen, safe. This wasn't just surviving, it was becoming. It was a quiet Tuesday morning when my phone lit up. No caller ID, just a string of numbers. I almost didn't pick up, but something in my chest fluttered. Hello? There was a pause, then a soft, cracking voice. Grandma? My heart stopped. Emma? Another pause. Yeah, it's me. I borrowed Dad's old phone. He never uses it. I wanted to hear your voice. I sat down slowly, the paintbrush slipping from my hand onto the kitchen table. I miss you, Grandma, she whispered. I don't know why you left. No one really talks about it, but I miss our baking days and your stories And your warm hugs. I even miss the way you hum when you fold laundry. Tears filled my eyes before I could speak. It took everything in me to keep my voice steady. I miss you too, sweetheart. So, so much. There was a shaky breath on the other end. I don't know if I'm allowed to say this, but could I come see you? Just for a little while? Maybe this weekend? My breath caught in my throat. The emptiness in my apartment suddenly felt like it had room for sunlight again. Yes, I whispered. Yes, Emma. I'd love that more than anything. We ended the call with quiet I love yous. And then I sat there for a long moment, staring at the soft green curtains fluttering gently in the breeze. For the first time in weeks, I felt needed. Saturday came wrapped in gold. The park outside shimmered with late autumn light. I made sure everything was just right. Fluffy pancakes ready for morning. Her favorite pink mug rinsed and placed near the kettle. The quilt folded neatly on the couch. At exactly 10:03 a.m., there was a soft knock. I opened the door, and there she stood. Emma, a little taller, her curls messier than I remembered, but her eyes, those warm hazel eyes, still held the same wonder. We didn't speak right away. She dropped her backpack. And then, suddenly, she ran into my arms. I missed you so much, she said, voice muffled against my cardigan. I held her tighter than I thought I could. I missed you too, my darling girl. The day flowed like a dream. We started with chocolate chip cookies, just like old times. She cracked the eggs like a pro, with only one shell shard casualty. I let her pour the vanilla and stir the batter. We ended up with flour on our noses, giggles echoing in my little kitchen. Then came painting. I pulled out 2 sketchbooks and a set of watercolors I'd bought the week before. Emma's eyes lit up. Can we paint the park? So we sat by the window, her with her brush held high like a wand, me with trembling hands trying to steady the blue sky. She painted a tree with purple leaves. It's a magic tree, she explained. It only grows where people still love each other, even if they're far apart. I almost couldn't breathe. I turned to her and smiled. I think I have one of those growing in my heart. She looked up and beamed. See? Told you it works. We had soup and grilled cheese for lunch, then curled up under the quilt with a book we used to read together when she was little. Her head rested on my shoulder. Halfway through, I realized she had fallen asleep. I didn't move. I just listened. To the sound of her breathing, to the stillness of peace settling into my chest. I thought of the days I'd spent in silence, wondering if I had disappeared from everyone's memory. But now, here she was. Proof that love doesn't vanish. It waits. And sometimes it returns wearing sneakers and flower-streaked cheeks. That evening, as she packed her things, she hesitated at the door. Grandma, could I come again next weekend? I knelt to zip up her coat and looked into those soft hazel eyes. My door is always open for you, sweetheart. She hugged me tightly. You're still my safe place. After she left, I walked to the window. The sun had dipped low, casting golden shadows across the floor. In the park, I could see a little girl chasing pigeons, and for the first time in what felt like forever, I smiled. Not the polite kind, not the forced one I used at family dinners. A real one, from the heart. Because something had shifted. I was still someone's safe place, and that was enough to begin again. It started with a beige envelope, no handwriting, just my name typed in bold, all caps, Joanna Wells. It arrived on a Thursday morning, slid through the mail slot like any other bill or junk catalog. But this one carried weight. I knew before opening it that the battle had officially begun. Inside, a formal complaint filed by Nathan, my son. It stated his intention to contest the updated estate plans due to concerns over the grantor's declining mental capacity. He was demanding a restoration of the old will, claiming I'd been pressured, confused, and emotionally manipulated into unjust amendments. It would have stung less if the words weren't written with such cold distance. But the pièce de résistance? The phrase, ongoing cognitive instability with observable symptoms of memory decay and decision-making impairment. I laughed. Not a cruel laugh. Just tired. All this because I chose to redraw my own lines. I didn't call Amelia right away. I sat with the letter, let the weight of it wash over me like cold water. It was never about the money. Not really. It was about control, narrative, shame. Nathan couldn't stand the idea of not being the good son, so he would turn the table, paint me as the broken one. But I was done being his canvas. Amelia called me before I had the chance to reach out. "Joanna, hey, are you okay?" "Perfectly fine," I replied. "Let me guess, you've seen it?" There was a sigh on the other end. "Yes. The paperwork hit the courthouse system this morning. Nathan's trying to petition a forensic psych evaluation. He's building a case for testamentary incapacity. He claims your judgment was impaired when you changed your estate plans." I stirred my tea gently. He's really gone all in. "That's not all," Amelia added. "He's hired a PR consultant, quietly. I think they're prepping a story. Possibly something like, estranged mother manipulated by outsiders into undoing her own family." A slow breath escaped my lips. Not fear, not anger, just a knowing kind of sorrow. "How do you want to proceed?" Amelia asked. I took a sip of tea before answering. Calm. Steady. "Let him." Amelia paused. "Joanna, I need to be honest. If this moves forward, we'll need an independent cognitive evaluation. I'll set it up with a specialist. You'll need to sit with a doctor, answer some questions, prove you're of sound mind." I smiled. "Oh, Amelia, if only he knew. I've never been clearer in my life." She chuckled softly, but her tone remained serious. "We'll prepare a full defense, but it might get personal. They may use your grief against you." I looked out the window, golden leaves drifting across the sidewalk. I'm not afraid of personal. I've lived it. A pause. Then I added quietly, "Let them take their shot. They're painting a portrait I no longer live in. I'm drawing my own now, one with light, and truth, and peace." She grew quiet for a moment, then said, "You know, for what it's worth, they're only making your case stronger." I nodded. "They're digging their own holes with golden shovels. All I have to do is not jump in after them." Word spread quickly. Within days, the women at my book club whispered updates over Biscotti. "Did you hear? He's suing her now." What kind of son does that? Claire, my dear friend and quiet foil, simply gave me a knowing nod. "This is the part where they throw stones because they're afraid of what you've built," she said gently. "They think if they break your windows, they can erase the view." I held on to that thought. That weekend, I wrote in my journal, "When they try to erase your story, write it in ink and pass it on." I called Emma, told her nothing heavy, just asked if she wanted to visit again next weekend. She squealed, "Yes," before I could finish the sentence. That was all I needed. I didn't need a courtroom to validate my clarity. Didn't need Nathan's approval, or Rachel's silence, or the neighbors' opinions. All I Needed was this moment, the calm before their storm, and the knowledge that storms, too, pass. I arrived 10 minutes early. The clinic was tucked into a quiet cul-de-sac, modern, sterile, with soft gray walls and the faint scent of lavender. I wore a navy blue blazer, cream blouse, and the pearl earrings Richard gave me on our 20th anniversary. I sat with my back straight, ankles crossed, palms open on my lap. There would be no trembling today. A young receptionist greeted me with a nervous smile. "Ms. Joanna Wells? Dr. Hensley will see you now." I stood, nodded politely, and followed her into a room with wide windows and soft lighting. No couch, just 2 chairs facing each other with a small oak table between them. Dr. Hensley looked to be in her mid-40s, sharp eyes, soft voice. Her demeanor was professional but kind, the kind of calm trained over years of listening to chaos. We exchanged pleasantries. Then she clicked her pen and said, "This won't take long. I just want to get a sense of your memory, reasoning, emotional awareness, standard cognitive screening." I nodded. "Of course." She started with simple questions. My full name, today's date, the name of the current president, then a bit of short-term memory recall, all of which I answered without hesitation. Then came the more nuanced part. "Can you tell me why your son is contesting your estate?" I smiled gently. "Because he's not used to hearing no from a woman." She blinked. "I see. And how do you feel about that?" I tilted my head slightly. "Liberated." She tapped her pen slowly. "Joanna, have you experienced any hallucinations, confusion, or episodes of forgetfulness in the past year?" "No, though I do sometimes forget why I walked into the pantry. I'm told that's normal after 60. She chuckled at that. "And your decision to amend your will, was that influenced by anyone?" I looked her straight in the eyes. "Yes." Me pause. "I influenced myself by reflecting on years of silence, of shrinking, of giving more than I received. I realized I had 2 choices: continue being the quiet backdrop to their lives, or reclaim the pen and write the ending myself." She nodded slowly, scribbling something. I continued. Calm, measured. "You know, people forget I was a respiratory nurse for over 30 years. I managed ventilators, advocated for patients on their deathbeds. I held hands through final breaths and talked doctors out of poor decisions. They forget," I said, voice steady, "that a woman who saved hundreds from losing oxygen might just have enough clarity left to save herself." Dr. Hensley's eyes lifted from her clipboard. Her expression had changed, slightly more alert, more respectful. "Tell me more," she said. So I did. I told her how Nathan and Rachel moved in after Richard's funeral, how they were all soft voices and warm hands, until they weren't. I told her how my house became theirs, how my opinions were labeled old-fashioned, and how my identity slowly evaporated into grocery lists and babysitting schedules. I told her about the savings account I built quietly after Richard passed, how I sold the cottage we restored together, not to give, but to protect, and how one day, after overhearing my granddaughter whisper the truth, I realized silence was no longer grace. It was complicity. Dr. Hensley leaned forward. "Joanna, are you angry?" I smiled, not with bitterness, but with clarity. "No, I'm awake." Another silence, this one softer. "I don't hate my son," I continued. "I just finally love myself more than his comfort." Dr. Hensley clicked her pen shut. She didn't need to say much. The room had shifted. I could feel it, the subtle recognition in her eyes, not of a patient, but of a woman, A woman who had been overlooked, underestimated, and now, quietly, unshakable. "Thank you for your time, miss. Wells," she said, standing. I shook her hand, firm but warm. "Thank you for seeing me." Not just evaluating me as I left the room, I glanced back once. She wasn't writing anymore. She was still watching me. The call came just after breakfast. Amelia didn't waste time with pleasantries. "Joanna, I need to see you today. In person. Bring every document you've signed over the last 5 years." There was a heaviness in her voice I hadn't heard before. Not concern, not alarm. Something colder. Controlled urgency. I gathered the manila folders from the second drawer in my bedroom, the ones I rarely touched. Receipts, letters, insurance papers, financial statements, all stacked neatly like I'd been waiting for this day. At her office, Amelia had cleared her desk. A legal pad sat in the center, 2 mugs of tea, and one thick folder I didn't recognize. She didn't start right away. Instead, she looked at me with something between pity and restrained rage. "Joanna," she said, "I found something." She slid the folder toward me, then opened it to the first page. It was a credit agreement, dated 2 years ago. The borrower listed as Joanna L. Wells, co-signed by Nathan R. Wells. I blinked. "I don't remember this." Amelia nodded. "That's because you probably didn't read it. Or weren't told what it was. It's a home equity line of credit, opened in your name. $180,000. My mouth went dry. "That's impossible. I never borrowed against this house." Her hand gently pressed the next page forward. "Look at the signature." I leaned in. It was my signature, slanted slightly left, just like always. I remembered the day, a folder placed in front of me while I was folding laundry, Nathan saying, "Mom, just a small formality. Tax stuff for the joint account." I didn't question. I signed. Because he was my son. Amelia flipped through more pages. Wire, transfers, account changes, beneficiary modifications, all from the past 3 years, all in my name. How did I not know this?" I whispered. Amelia's voice softened. "Because you trusted him. Because he made sure you never saw the full picture. And because people like Nathan know how to use love as camouflage." I looked at my hands. They were trembling. Not from fear, from shame. I felt like a fool. But I wasn't angry. Not yet. Not in that moment. Instead, I closed the folder slowly and stared out her office window. I remembered a morning 3 winters ago. Nathan bringing me pancakes, smiling too much. Rachel chirping about a smart new investment and how 2021 will be our breakthrough year. And me, sitting in my robe, thinking I was still the matriarch, when really I had become the signature. I took a long breath. "I'm not angry I trusted him," I said. "I'm angry that I believed trust would protect me." Amelia leaned forward. "There's more, Joanna. Your retirement account, the one Richard set up for you in 2005. It was partially liquidated 18 months ago. A total of $63,000 was withdrawn in 4 increments, all legally signed. Again, by you, my jaw clenched. I didn't, but I stopped, because I did. I remembered that summer, Rachel handing me an iPad while I was watching Lily in the garden. "Just tap here, Mom," she'd said. "It's for updating the utility billing address." I tapped. They watched. And I never asked. Silence filled the room. I felt it then, the quiet betrayal, slow and methodical, like a vine creeping over a house, covering brick by brick until nothing familiar remains. Amelia finally asked, "Do you want to press charges?" I shook my head. "No, not yet." She raised an eyebrow. "Why?" "Because I want them to believe, just for a little while longer, that I'm still in the dark." I smiled faintly. I want them to keep underestimating the woman they think is too gentle to fight back. Amelia nodded, but her eyes stayed on me. "What are you thinking right now, Joanna?" I paused, then spoke clearly, slowly. "I'm thinking about every time I signed a document without reading it. Every time I assumed love equaled honesty. Every time I thought motherhood meant giving without boundaries." I looked back down at the paper. "I wasn't wrong to believe in my son," I said softly. "I was wrong to think goodness doesn't change. That hearts don't rot when watered with greed." She said nothing, and neither did I. Because sometimes the truth doesn't roar. It just settles, cold, quiet, and irreversible. It was just after 6 when the knock came. Not the usual firm tap of the mailman. Not Emma's cheerful rhythm. This one was slower, heavier, as if the hand behind it had lost all certainty. I opened the door, and there he was. Nathan. No suit. No watch. Just a crumpled flannel shirt, eyes red, and cheeks sunken in ways I hadn't seen since he was a boy who failed his first math test. He didn't say anything at first. He just looked at me, like he was trying to find the version of me he used to recognize. Then, without a word, he fell to his knees. It wasn't dramatic. It wasn't staged. It was quiet and real. "Mom," he whispered, "I messed up." I didn't respond. He looked up, and for the first time in years, I saw the boy who used to bring me wildflowers from the schoolyard. "I lost everything," he said. "The house, the accounts. Rachel's gone. She took Lily and filed for divorce." He paused. "I didn't come here to ask for money. I swear. His voice cracked. "I need to know if you still love me." I stood still. My hand rested lightly on the doorframe. I didn't know how to answer. Not right away. Instead, I turned and walked slowly into the living room. He stayed on his knees, not daring to follow. I opened the glass cabinet and took out the photograph of Frank, the one from our 40th anniversary, the year before he passed. He was in his navy blazer, eyes kind, standing beside me in that garden of golden roses. I brought the frame to the armchair and sat down, the photo in my lap. Nathan stayed by the door. I didn't rush my words. He needed to feel every second of silence between them. "Do I love you?" I finally said. He looked up, holding his breath. "Yes," I said. "I love you." He exhaled, a sob of relief and disbelief. "But," I continued, voice firm, "I do not love what you did to me." His face froze. "I do not love the lies," I said. "The quiet theft, the manipulation, the way you smiled at me while stealing the very roof above my head." Tears ran down his cheeks. "I do not love the way you let Rachel talk to me like I was disposable. Or how you left me recovering alone after surgery, like I was some stray animal." I looked at the photo in my lap. "And I do not love that you used your father's death as an excuse to become someone he never raised you to be." Nathan dropped his head, unable to meet my eyes. "But I do love you," I said again, "because love, the real kind, isn't just a feeling. It's a choice, and I chose you the day you were born." I paused, "But I also choose me now." He looked up slowly. "I choose peace. I choose not to be dragged down by the wreckage of your guilt. I choose not to open my home or my bank account every time your conscience remembers I exist." I leaned forward, cradling Frank's picture. "Your father loved you fiercely," I said, "and I have too. But love doesn't mean accepting cruelty." Nathan crawled forward just a few inches. "Is there anything I can do?" he asked, his voice barely audible. "To make it right?" I stared at him, that broken version of my son. And for a moment, I did see the little boy again. "Forgiveness," I said, "doesn't always come with a seat at the table." He nodded slowly. "I understand." I stood and walked toward him. He stayed kneeling, eyes downcast. I placed my hand gently on his shoulder, just for a second. Then I opened the door wider. And he understood. He rose to his feet, steadied himself, and turned to go. Just before stepping off the porch, he turned back. "Thank you," he said, "for being honest, for still loving me, even when I didn't deserve it." I didn't answer, because sometimes silence is the most merciful truth. It all unraveled slowly, not with a bang, not with shouting, but with silence, like snow falling on a roof that was already cracked. Nathan lost his job 2 weeks after our final conversation. His employer, once charmed by his ambition, found the news about the fraud charges unsettling, even if no official conviction followed. The optics were enough. They let him go with a quiet severance package and no recommendation. Sabrina filed for divorce 3 days after that. She didn't even try to pretend it was about something else. Her lawyer filed a clean statement citing irreconcilable differences. But the real reason whispered around their circle was simpler. The money was gone. She moved back to her sisters in Denver, took the SUV, and applied for full custody of Emma. Emma, sweet child that she is, didn't cry when her mother explained things. She just asked, "Can I still visit Grandma?" I had already spoken to a child advocate by then, and to the court. We agreed Emma could come by every Saturday, from 10 in the morning until 6 in the evening. Nathan was not to be present during those visits, at my request, a condition the court respected, given everything that had happened. At first, I worried Emma would grow cold or confused. But children, real children, are resilient in a way adults forget how to be. She'd arrive with her little pink backpack, wearing the same sparkly sneakers, and hug me so tight around the waist I almost lost balance. We'd bake together. She liked rolling the dough too thin, then starting over. We painted birdhouses and left seeds for the robins out front. She'd ask questions, sometimes difficult ones. "Did Daddy make you cry?" "Yes," I'd say gently, "but not anymore." "Do you still love him?" "I always will. But sometimes love means stepping away." She seemed to understand in the way only children can, not with logic, but with instinct. The court case Nathan tried to bring forward, contesting my mental capacity to manage my estate, was dismissed. With prejudice. The judge, a silver-haired woman with kind eyes, had read the reports from the neurologist, the psychologist, and my primary care physician. "You are not only mentally sound, Miss Holloway," she said from the bench, "but your foresight in protecting your assets and personhood from familial manipulation is a model for others your age." I nodded, not smug, just tired, and relieved. The will remained intact. Every document, every clause Frank and I had built together stayed untouched. But I did make one change. Late one night, with a mug of peppermint tea and Frank's photo beside me, I opened the safe and pulled out the original document. My attorney arrived the next morning, and together we added one more clause: a scholarship. It would be awarded annually to a local high school graduate pursuing nursing. especially those from under-resourced families. We named it the Frank Holloway Foundation, because my husband was the one who reminded me, even in his final weeks, that a legacy is only meaningful if it helps someone else rise. I funded the endowment quietly. No press release, no grand unveiling. But when Emma found out, she beamed. "That's so cool, Grandma. Can I help choose the winners?" "Someday," I smiled. "When you're older." Nathan sent one letter. Just one. It arrived a month after our last conversation. The envelope was plain, the handwriting familiar but shakier. He didn't ask for forgiveness. He didn't ask for money. He just wrote, "I understand now. I don't expect anything. I just wanted to thank you for raising me with more grace than I showed you. I hope someday I can be better than I've been." I didn't reply. Some silences are merciful. Others are boundaries. And this silence I kept, not out of anger, but acceptance. In the garden, the roses began blooming again. I planted 3 new bushes beside the white bench where Frank used to read. One for peace, one for healing, and one for hope. Because even in the quietest endings, something new always begins. Emma turned 10 last week. She wore a lavender dress with tiny embroidered stars and a white ribbon in her hair that reminded me of a young Joanna, quiet, curious, and full of wonder. We had carrot cake on the back porch, just the 2 of us, while a soft breeze carried the scent of the purple hyacinths blooming in the railing pots. After she left that evening, I found a letter. It was folded neatly, tucked under the book she'd been pretending to read, but had mostly just held in her lap. The envelope was pink, and on the front it read, in her tidy print, "To Grandma." For school. I opened it slowly. Inside was a short essay, something she must have written for an assignment at school. The title read, "My Hero, Grandma Joanna Holloway." I sat down. My fingers trembled just enough that I had to pause halfway through the first paragraph. Then I read it out loud. Just once. For myself. My hero is my grandma. She taught me that strength doesn't need to be loud. When people were unfair, she stayed kind. When they were mean, she stayed calm. And when they tried to take everything from her, she didn't yell or fight like in the movies. She just smiled and proved them wrong by living better. She plants flowers and names them after people she loves. She makes cinnamon toast that never burns. And she listens. Like really listens. My grandma isn't famous, but she's the strongest person I know. I didn't cry right away. I just sat there for a moment. Still, quiet. Breathing in the weight of that love. Then I stood up, walked to the mantel, and placed the letter right next to Frank's photo. The same one where he's holding a fishing rod, grinning like he just told the world's worst joke. "Looks like you've got competition," I whispered to him. That night, I left the porch light on, even after Emma had gone. The next morning, I brewed my favorite tea. A black currant blend Frank used to tease me about, calling it Joe's Potion of Peace. I carried my cup to the balcony, the air still crisp, the sunlight just beginning to stretch across the railing. The purple flowers outside were blooming with more life than ever. I gently watered each one. Then I sat, and I thought about the names I had been called. Burdensome, difficult, forgetful, too much, not enough. They had tried to shrink me, tried to box me into roles that suited their convenience. But now, as the breeze brushed through my silver hair, as the steam rose from my cup and mingled with morning air, I understood something deeper than pain. They didn't see me as the root, but I had always been the root. the steady ground, the base of the tree, the quiet strength that held generations together, even when those branches forgot to turn back toward the soil that nurtured them. A week later, Emma returned. She ran through the gate, this time with a small suitcase. Her mother was moving again, and the schedule would change. The courts allowed longer stays now, a weekend at a time. As I helped her unpack, she looked at me and said, "Grandma, when I grow up, I want to live wherever you live." I looked at her, that sweet, soft face, that resilience already forming beneath her tiny frame. "You'll have your own place someday, baby," I said. "Somewhere bright and safe." She nodded. "But I'll build it next to yours." Later that night, after she fell asleep with her favorite bear tucked under one arm, I stood by the window. The moon cast a gentle glow on the garden. Frank's roses shimmered under it. And I realized I wasn't angry anymore. Not at Nathan, not at Sabrina, not even at the years that had felt stolen. I had found something they never understood. Stillness, rootedness, freedom. They had tried to make me invisible, but I had become undeniable. And perhaps that's the best kind of victory. The kind you don't shout about, just live into.